When June Shipp died in 2001, Patty and I were on vacation in Britain, and I felt so badly to be so far away from my friend Harold when he was suffering such a sudden loss. When we came home, we had lunch together because he wanted to tell me everything that had happened, how the funeral went, who did what, who said this, and how pleased he was with the final outcome. But over lunch, with tears in his eyes and his heart in his throat, he asked me, "Can you tell me that June is okay? Can you tell me that someday I might see her again? How do you know," he said, "there is life after death?" So we talked, and then we came back to my office, and I read him a passage of Scripture that has helped countless people down through the centuries try to imagine the mystery of life after death. And I stress mystery because none of us knows for sure, but we are given great insights of what to expect. And from Christ we have a promise that in my Father's house there are many rooms. And if it were not so, would I have told you that I go to prepare a place for you? And when I go and prepare a place for you, I will come back and will take you to myself, that where I am, you may be also. Here's the passage I shared with Harold that day. It's from 1 Corinthians chapter 15. "But in fact, Christ has been raised from the dead, the first fruits of those who have died. For since death came through a human being, the resurrection of the dead must also come through a human being. For as all die in Adam, so all will be made alive in Christ. But each in his own order. Christ the first fruits, then at his coming those who belong to Christ. Then comes the end when he hands over the kingdom to God the Father, after he has destroyed every ruler and every authority and power. For he must reign until he has put all his enemies under his feet. The last enemy to be destroyed is death. But someone will ask, how are the dead raised? With what kind of body will they come? Fool. What you sow does not come to life unless it dies. And as for what you sow, you do not sow the body that is to be, but a bare seed, perhaps of wheat or some other grain. And God gives it a body he has chosen, and to each kind of seed its own body. So it is with the resurrection of the dead. What is sown is perishable. What is raised is imperishable. What is sown in dishonor is raised in glory. What is sown in weakness is raised in power. It is sown a physical body. It is raised a spiritual body. If there is a physical body, there's also a spiritual body. For this perishable body must put on imperishability, and this mortal body must put on immortality. Then the saying that is written will be fulfilled. Death has been swallowed up in victory. Where, O death, is your victory? Where, O death, is your sting? The sting of death is sin, and the power of sin is the law. But thanks be to God who gives us the victory through our Lord Jesus Christ. Therefore, my beloved, be steadfast, unmovable, always excelling in the work of the Lord, because you know that in the Lord your labor is not in vain. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Now, if I had been the minister that Harold really wanted me to be, there would have been a sermon title in the printed brochure, but I simply didn't have it ready on time. So the title of this meditation is The Man Who Kept Moving. Keep that in mind. Many of you here have known Harold Shipp a lot longer than I, and some of you for a very long time. I've known him for just over 21 years as a member of this congregation, as a friend, and as a confidant. In fact, Harold was the very first person I talked to on my very first Sunday as minister of this church. There I was down the hall, 7:30 in the morning, anxiously pacing in my office, reading and rereading the sermon I'd prepared, when the telephone rang. Harold, on the other end, enthusiastically calls out, "Is the new minister there yet?" "Yes," I said hesitantly. "You're speaking to him." "Well, that's good. I'm glad you made it. I wanted to make sure you were there. I'll come to church this morning and meet you. See you later." No goodbye, just to hang up. I could hardly wait to see who this man would be. And as Mayor Hazel said, many times after that, the phone would ring just to say hello, or to invite me for lunch, or to go to a hockey game, or to some special party or celebration that he was organizing. Or he might just call from the parking lot to see if he could drop into the office and chat. Now, there's nothing earth-shaking about that, but I mention it as an entry point into understanding something about Harold Shipp. Throughout his life, he was a man on the move, a man always reaching out to others. Harold generously and in many very practical ways was so supportive of my ministry here, and I'll always be thankful for his generosity and goodwill. I remember skiing in Whistler one time, and we came in for our afterglow, and the phone rang, and it was Harold. He said, "What are you doing out there?" I said, "Well, I'm skiing. It's the post-Christmas reward." "Well, do you want to go to California?" I said, "Well, I'd like to, but I don't have any plans to." He said, "Well, Bob Schuler's running a school for pastors, and he challenged us to send our ministers to his school. I want to send you there. I've checked with Margaret. Your calendar's available. Your flight's booked." January the 21st, 1926, in the East End of Toronto, second child and only son of Bessie Breeze and Gordon S. Shipp, Harold began to move west at an early age when his family moved into the Kingsway. He went to Etobicoke Collegiate Institute, where in May 1944 he became somewhat of an Etobicoke legend. 18-year-old Harold had somehow managed to convince a ferry pilot to fly a roaring Lancaster bomber over the playing field during a football game and drop cards, many of which could be traded for prizes. It was a one-of-a-kind stunt to raise money for new bleachers for the football field. When the bomb bay opened, however, the stunt went awry in a one-of-a-kind way. The wind blew thousands of cards into the Chinese market gardens nearby. Hundreds of students rushed into the carefully tended cabbages, and Harold was rushed into the principal's office, where Mr. Wallace said to Mr. Shipp, "We have a situation. We're in big trouble." A few years ago, Harold was hoisted by members of the ECI Rams football team during a dedication ceremony of John Cuna's mural, to be found on Dundas Street, depicting Harold's first high flyer. Harold remained a faithful and generous supporter of ECI, attending commencement every year, presenting bursaries and scholarships to encourage young students while honoring the work of his coach and teacher, Pete Jackson. In June of 2013, ECI presented Harold with an honorary grade 13 certificate, and that honor meant more to him than he could describe. Harold's antics at high school were just a hint of what was to follow when he got into the working world. Many of you here today know the story better than I do, how Harold's father, Gordon, refused to hire him into the family's well-established home-building firm. So 19-year-old Harold started an operation in competition with his dad. He built 4 homes in the Kingsway and made a tidy profit when he sold them for $7,200 each. His father soon took him in as a partner, and they never looked back. At the age of 25, Harold paid $40,000 to buy 23 acres of apple orchards on the south side of the Queen Elizabeth Way at Dixie Road. As the mayor mentioned, 900 homes later, Applewood Acres was Canada's largest housing project developed and built by one firm. As the years went by, Harold kept moving further west. And as Toronto Township became Mississauga, and as it grew into Canada's sixth largest community, the Shipp Corporation grew along with it. Still, he kept moving west. Cars were certainly going to be important in these suburbs, so Harold and his partner Bert launched Applewood Chevrolet to sell new cars to new home buyers. One summer, he got worldwide coverage while he unveiled 3 new car models by putting them on the roofs of 3 model homes in the Richview Gardens project in Streetsville. To help sell all the homes and cars, Harold worked closely with a young woman who sold advertising for the Streetsville newspaper, and he continued that long and fruitful working relationship with Hazel McCallion, who he was always proud to call his mare. But Harold's life was not all business. On September 30th, 1949, Harold married June Ingram at Kingsway Lambton United Church. And together, they raised their 3 children, Victoria, Catherine, and Gordon. Saturday was Harold's day to spend with the children. He made every Saturday an adventure. He made life fun. There were many excursions, trips to the barn to ride the ponies along the trails, and if you fell off, you got right back on because that's the only way to conquer your fears. There were long walks through building sites, the kids collecting scrap metal that looked like silver dollars, while Dad talked to staff, walked through every house, and inspected every curb. One Saturday, Victoria, Catherine, and Gordon could be found riding horses through Square One when it was being constructed. Victoria and Harold got to ride horses in the Grey Cup Parade. Harold not only doted on his children, he was very loving and compassionate toward his mother. When his mother, Bessie, was sick and hospitalized, he took the back seats out of his convertible, filled the space with straw, took a young colt from the barn, went to the hospital to visit Grandma, who was wheeled out of the hospital just in time to see this unbelievable sight. He was the ultimate organizer and worked out the details down to the last item. On his way to the hospital, he was stopped at a light, and the person in the next car looked at the colt in the back seat, and Harold shouts so everyone can hear, "How do you like this for horsepower?" Saturday morning rounds with the children also included a stop at the car store, as Harold liked to call it. And while the kids would run around playing in floor models and shuffling all the pamphlets, Harold would be getting the scoop on how business was going. Everyone at Applewood Chevrolet knew to expect daily phone calls from Harold to get the numbers. How many new sales, how many used sales, how many leases. And finally, on the Saturday morning excursions, Harold would take the kids to Sonny's, and they would have lunch. I wonder if June knew all that Harold did with the children on Saturdays, but I bet she was glad to have them take him off her hands for a few hours. Harold had a wonderful sense of humor. He loved practical jokes, and he loved the little tricks that he liked to perform, and I was going to tell you about the Duke and Duchess, but you beat me to it. He would laugh and smile, and his eyes would almost disappear in the sheer fun of it all. And there would always be a tear in the corner. And how many of you know that Harold had a fascination for the funeral home business? T&P was just one of his favorite ports of call. And on some of his Saturday outings with the kids, he would take them to the funeral home for a tour, including the preparation room, the casket selection room, all part of his broad education for his children. And Harold loved to entertain. Some of the grandest parties I've ever been invited to were parties that Harold planned to celebrate anniversaries or birthdays. And 3 years ago, there was a very happy wedding celebration when he invited me to officiate at the wedding of he and Margaret at their new home in Mississauga. Harold thought everyone should be matched. He was delighted to say grace at the wedding of his first granddaughter to be married, and whenever he would ask me about my sons, he would say, "Are any of them married yet?" For several years, Harold was the chairperson of the Moose and Goose Club, and he invited me to say grace at that event. And he took great delight in getting as many men in tuxedos smoking cigars as possible crammed into the grand ballroom of the Royal York Hotel to raise funds for muscular dystrophy research and development. The Royal York, or the RY as Harold called it, was another one of his favorite haunts. Many a time, Evandro, Harold's good friend, would drive him to get his haircut at the RY. You might ask, were there no barbers in Mississauga or Etobicoke? Of course there were, but Harold was very loyal to his barber, and he continued to support the RY to the very end. One of the few times Harold didn't get his hair cut at the Royal York was when he was on a cruise in the Mediterranean. And before one of the ports of call in Spain, as only Harold could do, he got someone on the ship to make an appointment so that he could always say he had his hair cut by the barber of Seville. As I said earlier, Harold was a very proud Canadian, and he loved to belt out the words of our national anthem, especially in the front row seats of his beloved Maple Leaf Gardens. Harold is one of the longest season ticket holders on record, over 65 years, and he was quick to tell you that he and Gordon were there the last time the Leafs won the Stanley Cup. In connection to that happy, historic event, Harold was so proud to drive Punch Imlach in his convertible in the Stanley Cup parade. Apparently, those tickets were valuable to Harold for another reason. June loved hockey, and although she wasn't sure about dating this young Harold, she heard that he had Leaf tickets. And some of their first dates were in Maple Leaf Gardens. Did I say that Harold loved to entertain? More times than one could remember, Harold would phone June at about 5 o'clock in the evening to tell her that he was bringing home 6 or 7 friends for dinner. One time he brought a busload of workers for a barbecue in the backyard. Harold Shipp treated everyone with respect and kindness. He worked hard, and he honored hard work. Nothing was too much for Harold. He wouldn't stop until every detail was attended to. Long before the age of IT-related electronics, Harold managed to acquire the newest and latest toys before anyone else. These toys included color television, microwave, mobile phone, which he liked to use just before knocking on somebody's doors to surprise them. Another practical joke. Always on the cutting edge, Harold had the home wired for an intercom system so that he could answer the front doorbell with a booming voice, "Welcome, come on in," or call someone in the pool with what sounded like a megahorn type of speaker. I remember the night that Harold took me to the Air Canada Centre for a season opener, and he let me drive home the red Cadillac so that I could experience the OnStar GPS for the first time. He got the biggest kick out of saying, "Listen, she'll tell you when to turn. Listen, listen." He loved to surprise his friends with all these new gadgets and letting them try them out as well. Did anybody say Harold liked the phone? His first mobile phone was about the size of a shoebox, but he carried it everywhere he went, and he loved to call June on his way down the street and say that he'd be home for dinner as soon as he could get away, only to walk in the door moments later. Harold was fortunate to have wonderful and loyal executive assistants who helped him dial the phone and look up the numbers and keep in touch with people, one of whom is Angela, who worked with Harold over 20 years. In fact, Harold was blessed with many long-serving, dedicated people who worked with this family business, who were energized by Harold's energy, his commitment, and his active mind that never stopped, jotting down a note on the always available pen and paper tucked in his breast pocket or beside the bedside table. It's probably fair to say that neither Harold's family nor his large staff ever really knew what was coming next. The sky was the limit. And speaking of the sky, On his 80th birthday, and again on his 86th birthday, Harold went skydiving while enjoying the gift of life in his beloved Fort Lauderdale. Did I say anywhere that Harold was a man on the move? Indeed he was, always moving, never stopping. Each baptized Christian mirrors Christ in distinct ways. And one way that Harold did this was how he kept moving. Often in the Gospels we see Jesus in motion, going from one place to the next, making his final journey by stages to Jerusalem. Like Harold's ship, Jesus keeps moving. He keeps moving until some people believe that they've stopped him by nailing him to a cross, by closing him up in a tomb. But even death does not stop him. Soon he is moving again, resurrecting from the dead, ascending into heaven, coming back to us again before history achieves its consummation. A week ago Sunday evening, it looked as though Harold had reached his stopping point. But because Harold is one with Christ, death did not stop him. It's simply a step along the journey, the one step that ushers him into the best city he's ever seen, better than any city he's ever planned or developed, into a home that will be for him both permanent and ever new. As the so-called stopping of Jesus in death was soon trumped by his Easter, so Harold's death also gives way to Easter. He's traveling past last Sunday to an eternal Sunday, his own Easter with Jesus and the saints. And for that, we give thanks. Typical of Harold, he gets the last word, because among his papers at home, Margaret found this poem and asked that it be read today. It's entitled, "Miss Me, But Let Me Go." When I come to the end of the road and the sun has set for me, I want no rights in a gloom-filled room. Why cry for a soul set free? Miss me a little, but not for long, and not with your head bowed low. Remember the love we once shared. Miss me, but let me go. For this is a journey we all must take, and each must go alone. It's all part of the Master's plan, a step on the road to home. When you're lonely and sick of heart, go to the friends we know and bury your sorrows in doing good deeds. Miss me, but let me go. God be with you, Harold. We know he is. We miss you already, but we'll let you go.